It was the kind of Texas cold that sneaks under door seals and into your bones, the kind that puts teeth on metal and makes breath come out like little ghosts. Dawn had barely lifted its face above Dallas Love Field, and Hangar 14 glowed under its own hive of lights, bright, buzzing, unforgiving. In the middle of that light pool sat a silver jet that had no business sitting. It should have been a streak in the sky already, a rumor aimed at Washington, D.C. Instead, it was quiet and heavy and wrong, and every person in that hangar was pretending not to look at the clock. William Huntington III stood near the nose cone, one hand in the pocket of a coal-black coat, the other worrying the seam of a leather glove. The coat looked expensive enough to fund a crew bonus, if Huntington believed in such things, which most people gathered he did not. His face was all angles, and patience worn too thin. He didn't stamp his feet or raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room read his silence like a countdown. "Talk to me, Sean," he finally said, and his voice didn't echo so much as impose itself upon the rafters. Sean Draper, lead mechanic, ran a cloth over his already clean hands and tried not to look like a man fighting his own panic. "Sir, we've diagnosed the fuel delivery loop 3 times, the pump's within spec. We replaced the filter to be safe. Still reads low pressure. Computer flags it, locks the flow, won't let us cycle. I've got a guy calling down to Houston for a sensor, but even if they put it on a charter—" "Time," Huntington said. "Tonight, best case," Sean admitted. He didn't add that best case lived in fairy tales. He didn't need to. "Tonight," Huntington repeated, and his mouth curled not quite into a smile. Everyone else suddenly found things to stare at. The floor, a clipboard, the way the white breath coming out of their mouths made them look like they were all smoking in unison. The only one who kept watching Huntington was the young woman beside him, Emma, his daughter. She wore a wool coat the color of dusk and a steel expression she'd practiced in boardrooms that had never wanted her there. She'd earned her engineering degree and a file full of projects no one let her touch. She had the Huntington jaw, the Huntington money, the Huntington habit of asking questions that made people sweat. She had the Huntington name. It opened every door. It also chained her to a man who didn't know how to be impressed by anyone anymore. Outside the hangar fence, a boy leaned into the winter air as if it might tell him something. Michael Johnson, Mikey to anyone who bothered to ask, had a jacket that didn't zip up and boots whose toes were held together with gray tape. His breath came out in little ragged clouds. His fingers hid inside fraying gloves, only when he wasn't using them to clutch his backpack like it was a parachute. He'd found the gap in the fence weeks ago and memorized exactly how to slip through it without tearing another hole in his already thin life. The jet in the hangar was a thing to look at, not just because it gleamed like a promise, but because it hummed with all the things Mikey used to know by heart. His dad had taught him that engines talk if you listen right. "It's a conversation," Dad would say, hair stuck up like he'd lost a fight with the wind, grease making permanent art in the whirls of his fingers. Most people hear noise. We hear stories. We hear warnings. After the hospital. After the funeral. After the apartment door closed behind him and his mom for the last time because the rent didn't care about grief. After all of it, there was still engine talk in the winter mornings if he could get close enough to hear. Through the open doors, he heard Sean mutter, louder than necessary, the way men do when they want their voice to carry to certain ears. "Can't just let anybody near a $40 million jet," he said. "This isn't a car hood on a cinder block on the south side." Nobody laughed. The joke hung there, stale and sour. Mikey recognized the type. Men like Sean dressed their contempt in casual clothes and called it concern. They spoke in jokes and watched who laughed, which is how you count your allies. The portable diagnostic panel caught Mikey's eye. Even from the doorway, the code light was clear enough to read, if your eyes were used to chewing through numbers like they were candy wrappers. FP03. He knew it like he knew his mom's voice when the pneumonia finally let her whisper again. He'd seen that code on a little Cessna at a tiny shop near Fort Worth where his dad had worked weekends. FP03 screamed about low fuel pressure in cold weather because the sensor was a liar under freezing conditions, not because the pump wasn't pushing. "You got to treat the sensor like a toddler," Dad had said, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Hard reset, gentle reset, bribe it with a kinder reality. Don't just hit it with a hammer." Dad had always laughed when he said that last part, like he never wanted Mikey to be the kind of man who hit anything first. Mikey's heart started a drumbeat. He could fix it. He could at least try to talk the sensor down from its imaginary ledge. But there was a difference between knowing something and being allowed to say it. He looked at the people in the hangar and saw uniforms and lanyards and 100 reasons to mind his business. Then he pictured the sun rising somewhere over wheels that should already be rolling, and something inside him rose with it. He stepped into the hangar, trying to make himself taller by the force of wanting it. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice tripped on the cold. "I think I know what's wrong." Heads swiveled, the sound of lifting 100 pounds of attention and dropping it on one small boy. Sean's mouth thinned. "This is a secure area," he said. "You can't. Who let you in here?" "We're not running a field trip for—" He swallowed whatever word wanted to come out next. He didn't say it. He hung it in the air like a threat anyway. "I can help," Mikey blurted. "The code. The FP." "You read that?" Emma asked, disbelief and curiosity looping a tight knot. "I know it," Mikey said, and the shape of the word "no" gave him a sudden weird strength. "It's the cold. The sensor reads low. The computer closes the line to protect the engine, but the fuel's fine." Sean barked out laughter, the kind that tries to put you back in place. "He knows it. That's adorable. Is this your new hiring strategy, Emma? We gonna recruit off the street like it's some reality show?" "Stop," Emma said softly. Huntington hadn't spoken yet. He looked at Mikey as if he was deciding whether to care that he was there at all. He had a gift for stillness that made other people flail. He used it now. "What would you do," he said, like every word cost another dollar his jet wasn't earning by sitting there, "if the problem was, as you say, a sensor overreacting to the temperature?" Mikey swallowed, daring to step closer to the diagnostic panel. The warmth from the circuitry made his fingers ache with memory. "You kill power to the module, but you have to close the feed line just before. Then you reset the baseline pressure manually on the restart. It thinks it's reading wrong because of the cold, so you give it new truth, and it follows that." "You give it new truth," Sean mimicked, mouth twisting. "What are you, a wizard? It's a jet, kid, not a school science fair." "Sean," Emma said. "It's cute that you're trying to shepherd the young," Sean said, smile aimed at Emma like a polished knife. "But we're burning daylight while we indulge a—" "Let him try," Emma said, not looking away from Mikey. Huntington didn't sigh. He just tilted his head a degree, like he'd absorbed energy from the whole scene and redirected it through one precise pivot. "If you break anything," he told Mikey, "I will have you escorted out and charged, and I won't lose a second of sleep over it." Mikey nodded. "Yes, sir." "Not, sir," Sean said, rolling the word in his mouth like it was too sweet for him to swallow. "Just don't touch anything you can't name." "I can name it," Mikey said. He said it too fast, too hot, and then made himself breathe because Dad used to say, "Breath is how you tell yourself you have time, even when the world is yelling that you don't." He unsnapped the access panel, careful with the screws because nothing makes a crew hate you like letting a screw fall and disappear into the innards of the machine. He half felt Sean's stare like a light burned onto the side of his face. He found the module's power line by sight and then by feel, like reading Braille made of metal and plastic. He had never touched this model before. He had touched engines, though. He knew the way harnesses tucked against ribs, the way wires hugged along bone. He pulled the line. He counted 5 Mississippi not with his mouth but with his fingers, a tap for each second against the inside of his palm. He reinserted the line, pressing the manual override with the edge of his thumb and resetting the baseline to spec while the system hummed itself back to life. The red error blinked like a stubborn child, then flicked to orange, then to green. The mechanic in the cockpit shouted down, "We're green," and the word bounded through the hangar, hunting for a place to sit. It found Emma's mouth first. She smiled like the sun had just remembered the hangar existed. Sean leaped to explain it to himself, stringing words like temporary and fluke and lucky, because you can't be wrong if you can construct a story fast enough. "Starter!" Huntington called, and he didn't raise his voice, but the engines heard him anyway. They coughed, they gathered themselves, they roared. For a moment, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. Mechanics snapped into the choreography of pre-flight. Someone patted Mikey's shoulder, lightly, quickly, like touching him too openly might make something happen to their hands. Emma stepped between Mikey and the cold air. "Where did you learn that?" "My dad," Mikey said, and telling it sucked air out of his chest like grief still had a hand on him from somewhere. "He taught me. He used to fix planes. He taught me." "And where is he?" Huntington asked. It wasn't so much curiosity as audit. "Dead," Mikey said quietly. 3 years. "And your mother?" "Sick," he said. "She'll get better." You put the certainty on the end of the sentence even if you don't own any. That's the trick. "Get him a jacket," Huntington said to no one and everyone, "and gloves that fit, and a badge that lets him in the door where he didn't have to squeeze under a fence like a stray. Sean, add him to the floor. Shadow. He shows up again. He can watch and hand you tools. He's got an eye. I pay for eyes." "He's a kid," Sean said too quickly. "There are insurance. There are policies." "Write me a policy," Huntington said. "You're good at writing things when you want something. Write me one that gets me what I want." Sean shut his mouth, but the color in his face didn't know how to follow orders, and it went 2 shades darker. That should have been the end of the story. A clean arc. Boy proves himself, rich man changes his mind, camera crews arrive. But you don't live your life on clean arcs, and Dallas didn't get that memo. The jet took off, a silver streak finally allowed to be itself. Huntington left a storm-shaped hole behind him. Emma pressed a paper cup full of coffee, real coffee, into Mikey's hands. It scalded his tongue and made his stomach warm and heavy in the best way. Someone found him a Huntington aviation jacket. It dwarfed him and yet fit like something destined. He went back to the shelter with a jacket that didn't zip on fear but on actual metal. That night, guys he didn't know gave him nods that meant things. That night, his mom coughed quieter. He put the jacket on the chair and watched it until he fell asleep because he was halfway convinced it might dissolve if he looked away. He came back the next afternoon, and the next. Emma filled a clipboard with tasks that were real but not dangerous. Inventory fasteners by size, label wire spools, clean the sockets, read the maintenance logs, and tell her which ones didn't add up. He read them like they were stories and circled lines that felt like lies. She didn't say "good boy" or talk to him like he was a miracle pet. She nodded and said, "That's useful." It was the most intoxicating phrase he'd heard since "try again." Sean watched all of it with the look of a man waiting for gravity to reassert itself. He didn't call Mikey anything you'd have to bleep. He called him kid and buddy and champ in the tone some men reserve for dogs. He told jokes to the other mechanics that weren't about race precisely, just about the zip code that lived under Mikey's nails. About bootstrap booties, with a pointed glance at the duct tape on Mikey's toes. About the affirmative action program for orphans. The laughs were quiet, not because they were kind, but because laughter echoes here, and no one wanted ownership of the echo. One afternoon, a man from the insurance company came by with papers and the kind of smile that sweats. He shook Huntington's hand like he was trying to convince it to stay attached. He glanced at Mikey and put on the exact face rich people make when asked to be open-minded in front of witnesses. "Wonderful initiative," he said through his teeth. "Community engagement is very good for liability posture." "What he means," Sean said later, more quietly, to a ring of mechanics and one airborne rumor, "is that if this kid so much as stubs his toe, we're all going to fill out a novel of paperwork." The mechanics half laughed. Mikey pretended to be interested in a bin of rivets that didn't need that much of his attention. The news story hit 2 days later, a local channel segment with a breathless anchor who called it an unlikely Christmas miracle in February. Some of the facts were wrong. The model of the plane, the name of the sensor, but the feeling was right. Enough. Donations hit the shelter like a sudden rainstorm. A church brought dinner. A woman in a car rolled down her window and gave Mikey a fistful of gift cards and then looked up at the sky as if she could pretend it wasn't charity. Emma printed out a scholarship application packet. She'd already filled in his name and most of the blanks. "You'll need to write an essay," she said. "I can help you with the boring parts. You don't need help with the truth." "What's the truth?" Mikey asked, which is the kind of question only kids and poets have the courage to say out loud in a fluorescent-lit office with bad coffee. "That you love the sound of engines," she said, "and it loves you back." He took the forms home to the shelter and wrote his essay in a tiny, careful hand that didn't match his rough life. He wrote about the way engines speak in different dialects, the dry cough of a line that needs bleeding, the wet huff of oil where it shouldn't be, the whine of a bearing that's going to break long before the computer knows it. He wrote about his father's funeral and how quiet the world got afterward, except when he stood near a runway. He wrote, and the writing was its own engine, and it carried him forward even when he wanted to stop and cry. On a Wednesday that began like any other, the hangar's silence changed. It wasn't louder, it was tighter, the way the air gets before lightning. Mikey came in, flashed his new visitor badge at a guard who had decided to be nice in front of Emma, and felt the room watching him in a way that wasn't admiration, wasn't curiosity. It was inventory. He found Emma with a face like a press release that hadn't been approved yet. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," she said in a way that meant everything. "Just don't go near the tool cage today, okay?" "Okay," he said, and waited for the part where she told him why. She didn't. At lunch, a roomer walked up and sat next to him. "They're saying a torque wrench is missing," a younger mechanic named Luis whispered. Luis liked Mikey because liking him irritated Sean. "An expensive one, digital. Sean says he saw you by the cage last night. He didn't, but he says he did." Mikey felt his stomach go cold. "I didn't." "I know," Luis said. "But you know who really buys the story is not the same as who tells it." It turned into a meeting because all bad things in corporate hangars turn into meetings, so there is a schedule to the cruelty. Huntington wasn't there. He was en route to a thing that would make more money. Emma was there, and the head of security, and Sean, and two other men who introduced themselves with titles instead of names. They spoke in sentences full of concerns and unfortunate optics and process. They said the words police and report and formal complaint like they were utensils you use at a very specific table. "We can review footage," Emma said, voice level. "Cameras in that corridor are down," security said. He didn't make it sound like an accident, he made it sound like weather, unfortunate and beyond the reach of anyone's hands. "I didn't take anything," Mikey said, and he hated that he had to say it with his mouth because if this room could not already tell the difference between him and a thief, then his mouth might as well be speaking to a wall. "No one is accusing you," Sean said, a smile doing mean things to his cheeks. "We're just, exploring. And listen, champ, if your situation is, difficult, sometimes people do things they wouldn't otherwise." "What situation?" Mikey asked, though he knew. "Come on," Sean said, spreading his hands. "This whole shelter kid with heart of gold bit makes good TV, but tools go missing. It is what it is." Emma's chair scraped as she stood. "You don't get to do that," she said, all quiet razor. "You don't get to bury an accusation in plausible deniability and pretend your hands are clean." Sean spread them wider, daring anyone to find dirt. "I'm just being practical." "Practical," Emma repeated. "Right. Then, to security. Review everything you can review. Talk to everyone on the floor, and if I find out a camera was turned off on purpose, I will take the batteries out of your career." Security blinked. It was as close as he would come to flinching in public. Mikey left the meeting with the old familiar feeling that he had stepped out of his own life and into a story told by someone who didn't like him. He tried to work. He tried to let the language of machines drown the language of suspicion. It almost worked until two officers in Navy uniforms with polite faces asked to speak to him outside. "Just to clear things up," one said. "Voluntary," the other said, which is how you know it never is. They stood under the hangar's bleached sky and asked him questions like how long he'd been near the cage and who had keys, and did he know the tool's value, and did he understand the seriousness of taking something from a secured facility. He said, "No, and I don't, and I didn't," and the words felt like paper boats in a flood. "Can I call my mom?" he asked finally, hating the way the word mom came out of a big mouth like his, like he was 4. "Of course," the polite cop said. "Where is she?" "In the hospital," Mikey said, and suddenly he couldn't say anything else because his mouth had closed like a fist around grief. "We're done," Emma said, appearing like a storm you decide to stand under. "He's a minor. You want to talk to him again? You'll talk to counsel." The cops left with handshakes. Sean watched them go and looked at Mikey like he had tried to steal something far bigger than a wrench. And he had, in a way. He had tried to steal a place inside this hangar where he wasn't a suspect. The wrench turned up the next day in a trash bin behind the vending machines, inside a Huntington Aviation gift bag. Security put tape around the bin like it was a crime scene on television, Sean said. Weird, and somehow managed to inject the word with something like triumph. Mikey watched Emma look at the bag for a long time, like she was doing calculus on the back of it. Then she turned and walked into Huntington's glass office without knocking. By the time she came back out, there were two men in suits he didn't recognize moving through the hangar like sharks who had smelled something interesting. They were not police. They were the other kind. The kind who look at your life and decide if it is a risk they are interested in mitigating or a complication they can afford to ignore. Emma called Mikey into the side office where she kept a plant that refused to die and a picture on the wall of the first paper airplane she could throw that would fly straight. "We're going to fix this," she said. "And I'm not just talking about the wrench." "You can't," Mikey said, and the words popped out not because he didn't believe in her, but because he knew how many times belief had been sold out by cameras that conveniently broke at inconvenient times. She leaned in like she was about to tell him a secret. "Do you know what the worst thing about being a Huntington is?" He said nothing. It felt like a trap question, and traps are often lined with silk. "People assume you're invincible," she said. "Which means they take risks in front of you they wouldn't take in front of anyone else because they think you're too insulated to notice. They think you don't hear lies because you never had to learn the sound." "But I did. I learned it early," she straightened. "You tell me if you did anything that makes me a liar when I tell my father you didn't." "I didn't," he said. It came out as so much more than 2 syllables. "Then I believe you," she said, and stamped the sentence with her last name. 2 days later, the sharks were gone. Security had a new boss with a new haircut and a new way of standing very close to Sean. Cameras came back to life with coincidental vigor. The old footage from the night the wrench disappeared could not be recovered, because that is the way of footage that would have saved you. But 3 mechanics whispered to Emma privately that they had seen Sean near the cage late, saying something about inventory, looking up when one of them walked past as if he'd been caught with his hand in the wrong drawer. None of them wanted to go on record. None of them wanted to be the next person to have a bag with a wrench show up near where they'd been standing. Huntington returned that Friday, the jet's tires still warm. He didn't ask about the wrench because he didn't need to. He asked Mikey a question that landed like an anvil and a gift all at once. "How fast can you read?" "Fast," Mikey said, then added, "Sir," and wasn't sure if that made it better. "Emma says you like logs," Huntington said, a sentence you only hear in hangars and courtrooms. "We've had a recurring issue with 2 of the G700s, intermittent depressurization, warning at high altitude that never manifests as actual depressurization. It's killing our pilots' confidence and jamming up schedules. We've replaced the obvious. We've replaced the things people replace when they want to be seen replacing things. We have not fixed it." He handed Mikey a stack of maintenance logs thick enough to anchor a boat. "Find me the rhythm," he said. "Emma says you can hear it. Hear it." It felt like someone had reached into Mikey's chest and swapped his tired heart for a better one. He carried the logs into a corner like a feast. He read for hours, losing track of time in the way the air scythed his cheeks. Each line was a note, each light on a panel was a syllable. He found the through line at the bottom of a page on the 3rd folder, where a senior tech had written, "Adjusted cabin sensor mount, corrected minor vibration." A few pages later, in a different airplane's log, a junior tech had written, "Resecured. Line harness by bulkhead, rattling at cruise altitudes." The kind of notes people add because they think a thing should not rattle and not because they know what rattling says at 45,000 feet. Separate notes, separate planes, separate hands, same song. The cabin sensor mount and the harness shared a vibration path that only woke up at certain frequencies. High altitude, certain speeds, the kind of frequencies that turn into ghosts your computers swear are real. The pressure wasn't changing. The sensor thought it was because the world was shaking it just enough to be convinced. He stood up and walked the hangar like a map, following vibration in his head, practicing what he would say without Sean in the room and then with him, since both scenarios required different armor. He found Emma and laid the pages out like tarot. "It's resonance," he said, and she smiled like an engineer who just heard her native tongue in a place where it wasn't supposed to be spoken. They tested his theory in a controlled run with a pilot who rolled his eyes and said, "If a kid fixes my plane, I'm buying him a steak," and then stopped rolling those eyes when the warning never came. Emma turned it into a procedure with actual steps and tolerances, because genius and utility are different gifts. Huntington turned it into a memo called "Solution" in a font that didn't allow for doubt. The day the memo went out, Sean laughed loud in a way that told you he had been quiet too long. "We're letting him set procedure now," he said to the floor, which is a way of talking to everyone and no one, so you can pretend you were just thinking out loud if called to account. What a time to be alive. That a problem? Luis asked, too gentle to be anything but deliberate. Just seems like we're lowering the bar for who gets a say, Sean said. I guess if you go viral, you earn a wrench and a vote. What did you earn? Emma asked, and the hanger did the kind of silence that lets everyone hear where the sentence falls. Experience, Sean said, almost kindly, almost meaning it. Years. Things that don't fit in a news clip. Then act like it, Emma said, and walked away. You could feel the lines being drawn. The ones who took long lunches with Sean found reasons to be near him again. The ones who were brave in theory drifted toward Emma's gravity when they thought no one would notice. Mikey learned how to not hear himself being discussed without losing track of his own name. The scholarship letter came on a Tuesday, printed on paper, thick enough to stop a dart. Emma put it on his lap and didn't say anything until he looked up at her with a face he couldn't control. Then she said, "You earned it," because she knew what words fall out of boys when you give them good news, and didn't want to hear him say thank you like she was the whole reason. He showed it to his mom in a hospital room that smelled like lemon and old fear. She held it with fingers bent from work and sickness and stroked the seal like it might purr. "You're going to learn more words for the songs," she whispered. "You're going to write your own." He pinned the letter to the corkboard above his shelter bed and lay awake, watching how the light found it different ways through the night. It might have ended there, again, on a high note that let everyone sleep. It didn't. It ended, or rather broke and mended one more time, on a Saturday morning when the jet that had first refused to fly rolled into the hangar after a flight nobody enjoyed. The pilot got out with a face like he'd bitten a lemon through its peel. "Bird strike," he said. "Minor, port side. We had to descend quick. No panel warnings until we were already diving, which feels like something I would prefer not to repeat." Sean pounced like the universe had given him a gift wrapped in feathers. "There," he said. "There's your Wonder Boy's new truth. He reset something he shouldn't have, and now the panel's lazy. We get birds, but we get warnings." "That's false," Emma said, a little too fast, "and you know it." "Do I?" Sean asked, eyebrows climbing their ladder. "Or do I know you've put a child between us and a lawsuit, and the only thing saving us is your father's money and his appetite for risk?" Huntington had stepped into the hangar behind the pilot and was just in time to hear his own name used as a weapon. "If you'd like to invoke me," he said, "do it to my face or not at all." Sean didn't blanch. He had bet on bravado before and survived. "Sir," he said, "we are running procedures invented by someone with no certification. Now we have a delayed warning during a bird strike. Maybe the two are unrelated. Maybe they're not." Mikey felt everyone's eyes look for him like he was an exit. "Let's test," Huntington said, making the decision sound easy because that is what he did when he was afraid. "Emma?" She had already run the movie in her head. The bird strike protest had been logged by the plane. The panels recorded more than they told you. She took the data from the flight recorder and fed it into a laptop and bent over it like it was a patient. Mikey hovered at her shoulder, not touching, because touching is not always how you help. The panel wasn't lazy. If anything, it was conservative. The delay was in the airspeed sensor, not the strike warning. A microfracture had made the reading sticky, and it woke up only when the air got shoved under pressure by a sudden descent. A bird had guts. So did the math. She said it out loud, and Sean opened his mouth to argue, then closed it without speaking, because the facts were outnumbered by her determination. Huntington listened, nodded once, and said, "Replace the sensor. Add an inspection to the list after any strike event, no matter how minor." Sean was stoned for a second. Then he said, "Yes, sir," like the words had to drag themselves out of him by their elbows. It should have been over, but men like Sean don't know how to stop when they've been told. They only understand winning or being denied it. 3 hours later, Mikey was relabeling a bin because labels had become a refuge when he heard Sean's voice at his back, too close. "You really think you're going to last here?" he said. "Come on, kid. Tell me you know what game you're in. They like you today. They like stray dogs when the cameras are on. You're a headline, not a hire." Mikey turned, slow, careful, because snapping isn't always the thing that saves you even when it would feel so good. "I'm here to learn," he said. "Learn what?" Sean asked. "How to knead? How to smile good for the paper? I did your life longer than you've been alive, champ. I've worked with guys who think they're owed something because their daddy didn't leave them a house. I'm not impressed." "Okay," Mikey said, because sometimes you give a man a place to stand in his own cruelty so he can hear how it sounds. You don't have to be. You're a guest here, Sean said, stepping closer. Don't forget it. A shadow moved behind Sean's face. Emma. She had moved like a ghost when she heard his voice go low. She didn't put a hand on Mikey. She put her shoulder next to his so he had a wall that wasn't steel. Neither do you, she said to Sean. Forget it. Is this the part where you remind me your last name can pay me to leave? Sean said, smiling like he'd beaten her to the punch. No, she said. This is the part where I remind you this is a workplace and you know how to be a professional. And if you won't, someone else will be. He looked at her, at Mikey, at the way the room had paused with a wrench in its hand. He chose to retreat. Men like him call it magnanimity when it's actually fear of consequence. That night, the hangar went quiet in the special way that only places full of machines can be quiet. Mikey stayed late because paper labels and stacked bins and checklists felt like a way of proofing his existence against lies. Emma stayed because she didn't trust quiet men to stay quiet after being told to. They worked in a companionable rhythm until the wind creaked at the big doors and the clock admitted it was nearly midnight. Go home, she said finally, straightening and stretching and grimacing the way people do when their backs are younger than their responsibilities and older than their dreams. Sleep. He nodded. He left the jacket unzipped because the cold felt like a thing he had earned the right to not be afraid of. On Sunday, Huntington delivered a speech at a donors' brunch about community engagement that he didn't write. He did not mention Mikey by name, but everyone knew who he meant when he talked about hunger meeting opportunity. On Monday, a letter showed up addressed to Mr. Johnson, and the Mr. made Mikey carry it in both hands. It was from the scholarship committee. Acceptance, full ride, stipend for books and tools, a note in pen from the dean. We look forward to what you'll teach us too. He brought it to the hangar because he wanted the light there to touch it. Louise whooped. A woman from HR who had never looked him full in the face before hugged him so quickly it might have been a spasm. Emma took a picture of him holding the letter and then made him take another with the jacket zipped and then one without the jacket because she was funny like that when the room let her be. He took the letter to the hospital that night. His mom read it out loud, every word like a small bell. She nodded and kept nodding like the letter was still speaking even after she'd reached the end. You see, she said, eyes wet and blazing. You see? He did. He saw nothing and everything and felt like his chest had been replaced with the ocean. Weeks passed like a film montage you'd roll your eyes at if it weren't happening to you. He learned names for tools he'd already been using because language makes grown-ups comfortable when you hold their toys. He learned why procedures exist and how to find where they bend without breaking. He learned the way Huntington's eyes softened when Emma spoke, and the way a man can be a fist his whole life and not know how to unclench until someone else does it for him first. He learned that Luis made terrible coffee but would share his lunch. He learned that Sean could go 3 days without saying a thing worth remembering, and then a 4th day where he'd say something so ugly it would stick under your skin for a week. He also learned that leaving is a kind of skill, and the hangar was a teacher. The day before he left for the program, he stood in the doorway for too long, not because he was reluctant, but because he was memorizing the smell, jet fuel and detergent, and the faint tang of ozone from the chargers. He shook Huntington's hand, and if there was a moment where that man's grip felt like something that could be mistaken for pride, Mikey pretended not to notice. Pride is a delicate thing in the hands of men who paid for everything they own with money someone else earned in the field. Emma hugged him. Full stop, no apology. You'll come back, she said, and made it into an instruction and a promise at once. I will, he said, because he knew the route by heart already, the one from the shelter to the hangar to the sky, to the school to the hangar to the sky again. He walked out into a morning that wasn't as cold as the one that started this story. The sun was up properly now and doing its best to mend the frost marks on the concrete. His breath steamed in front of him, not because he was freezing, but because he was alive. The jacket fit better than it used to. The duct tape on his boots had been replaced with real laces a donor bought him in a box that smelled like a mall. He carried a backpack that was heavier for good reasons. He stopped at the fence where the gap was, the one he had slithered under to find the life he was walking into now with a badge. He crouched and touched the edge of the chain link like he was blessing it. Thank you, he whispered to the gap and to his father, and to the censor that wanted a new truth, and to the version of himself that kept showing up even when it didn't look like it mattered. Behind him, engines stirred, metal talked. The hangar breathed out into the day with a noise that made his bones hum. He smiled, and it wasn't the kind of smile that begged or explained or apologized. It was the look of a boy who understood that sometimes you don't win because you outshout the world. Sometimes you win because you listen better than it knows how to. He walked toward the bus stop and a future that would need him. Ahead, the runway mapped out a grammar only a few people ever learned to read. He would be one of them. Not because a billionaire reached down and lifted him, though that's the picture some people would hang on their walls. He would be one because he kept reaching up and grabbing whatever edge he could find, and because someone finally let him hold on long enough to pull. It took the jet a few seconds to get loud enough for sound to be a touch. He looked up, watched it turn, watched the morning catch it and throw it back at the sky as a silver whisper. The engine sang a song he knew. He sang it back under his breath, a conversation, a promise, a prayer that did not need a church to be true.